So let's move on to question number 3. This comes from David on Twitter. So David at NUMAVID. So why exactly is there a difference between eating cannabis compared to smoking it? And it's people who have used both forms of cannabis, dry flower through smoking or through vape cartridges and vaping, will say that it's a very different experience than when you actually eat an edible or have a tincture. So any oral cannabis ingestion. And the reason for that is because edibles get processed through the liver, whereas when you're smoking or vaping, it doesn't get processed through the liver. So when THC gets processed through the liver, it becomes 11-hydroxy THC, which is a different compound than THC itself. It's more psychoactive. Some people say it's 2 to 3 times more psychoactive. Some people say 5 to 10 times more psychoactive. So you have to be very safe and careful and precise in your dosing when you're using edibles, because you can in fact have a really bad experience. I bet literally every single person watching this knows at least one person who has had a bad experience with edibles, and maybe you've even had a bad experience with edibles yourself. And so when you are using edibles, you need to be very safe and make sure that your dosing is very precise. Like if you're starting off just using cannabis edibles, like 2.5 milligrams of THC on its own should probably be like more or less your max dose. Because if you use even just 5, 10 for sure milligrams of THC, you may start to have some unpleasant side effects. And unfortunately, those unpleasant side effects can last for a long time. Like when you're vaping or smoking and you get into a bad spot, I'm not saying it's not unpleasant or it's not a big deal. That will dissipate within a few hours, 1, maybe 3 hours maximum, and it'll gradually get better during that time. When you have a bad edible trip, it can be rough because you may have to be in that place for 4 to 6, almost even 8 hours, depending on how much you took and the dose that you took and your level of experience with using THC and cannabis. There's a big difference overall, like I said, and it's just because when you take it orally, it goes to your liver. It becomes 11-hydroxy THC, which is completely different than THC itself. And so you want to make sure that if you are going to do an edible, that you do it safely. But maybe the best way to take an edible, though, I think, is if you're going to use THC, you should always use it with CBD in equal amounts or parts, or even in high doses. So meaning if you're going to take 10 milligrams or 2.5 milligrams, say, of THC, if you use 10 milligrams of CBD, that's a 4-to-1 ratio. It's very unlikely that you're going to experience any unpleasant side effects from THC. As you go down and say to a 2-to-1 ratio, if you use 5 milligrams of CBD to say 2.5 milligrams of THC, then you are increasing your risk of potentially having a bad experience or a bad trip with cannabis. But that being said, with that dose so low and with the CBD in a 2-to-1 ratio to counteract it, probably unlikely to have a negative experience overall. Hopefully that helped answer that question. And with regards to smoking it, again, it's going to hit you very quick. That's the big difference when you smoke it or vape versus edibles. It's going to hit you right away, essentially within seconds to minutes. Whereas with edibles, it's going to take probably roughly an hour or so to kick in. Very good question. A lot of people have asked me about that. And so I'm happy to answer it. And hopefully that does answer your question, David. So thank you so much again.